The school buzzed with the restless energy of youth, a cacophony of laughter, shouts, and the occasional thud of a locker slamming shut. Sunnydale High was a typical mid-sized institution, nestled in the heart of a suburban neighborhood that seemed, at first glance, as peaceful and picture-perfect as any postcard could portray. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy lay the intricate challenges of teenage life, friendship dramas, academic pressures, and the ever-looming specter of bullying. In this charged atmosphere, where cliques formed like constellations in a chaotic galaxy, one name echoed with an unwilling reverence: Tyler, the Titan Moore. He was notorious for his brash demeanor and imposing size. Towering over most students, Tyler thrived on instilling fear in others. His entourage, a mix of sycophants and equally misguided peers, followed him like shadows, reinforcing his power through laughter or silence as he wielded his influence with little regard for others' feelings. As the morning bell rang, students filed into classrooms while their conversations danced between excitement for upcoming events and apprehension about inevitable altercations. Amidst them was Mrs. Agnes Thompson, an elderly volunteer who had taken it upon herself to assist at the school library. With her silver hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses perched on her nose like an inquisitive owl, she was often overlooked by the boisterous students bustling past. But Mrs. Thompson possessed a wealth of wisdom hidden behind her gentle smile that many were unaware of. On that fateful Thursday morning, Mrs. Thompson had arrived early to prepare for the day's activities. She meticulously organized books on the shelves and set up computers for students who needed a space to study or research projects. Her presence felt like a warm blanket against the chill that sometimes fluttered through the halls. Her passion for fostering young minds was palpable. Meanwhile, Tyler sauntered down the corridor with his usual swagger, the very embodiment of adolescence's darker side. He reveled in the attention he commanded from classmates who either laughed along with him or hurriedly ducked away to avoid drawing his ire. Little did he know that today would bring an unexpected challenge to his reign over Sunnydale High. As fate would have it, Tyler's path crossed with Mrs. Thompson's when he spotted her bending over a shelf to return some books. A flicker of mischief ignited within him. After all, what fun was being feared if one couldn't play? In his mind's eye, he envisioned himself as an untouchable king surveying his domain and decided to assert his dominance over this unsuspecting target. "Hey there, Granny," he taunted loudly enough for nearby students to hear, hoping to draw laughter from them as if they were mere props in his dramatic performance. "You lost your way to bingo night?" The laughter from nearby onlookers filled the air as Tyler moved closer. Little did Tyler know that in those moments leading up to what he thought would be just another harmless prank lay something far more significant. An encounter that would ripple through not just his life but also change perspectives among countless others within those familiar yet unpredictable walls of Sunnydale High. Tyler Moore was known around Sunnydale High not just for his size but for the aura of intimidation he cultivated. His reputation as a bully was well-earned. Rumors of his antics circulated among students like wildfire. He had a knack for targeting those who appeared vulnerable, using their insecurities to fuel his own need for control. Over the years, countless students had fallen victim to his relentless mockery or outright aggression, but despite the pain he inflicted, Tyler seemed impervious to repercussions. His motivations were layered and complex. Though he wore a mask of bravado, there lay beneath it a sense of inadequacy. Coming from a turbulent home life where he often felt overlooked and undervalued, Tyler found solace in the power he wielded over others at school. Bullying became his coping mechanism. By dominating his peers, he believed he could carve out a space for himself that felt secure amid chaos. This misguided sense of strength contributed to an ego that flourished on fear, his laughter echoing through empty hallways like a battle cry. Many teachers and staff had turned a blind eye to Tyler's behavior, dismissing it as typical adolescent roughhousing. He had expertly avoided serious consequences by charming or intimidating authority figures, painting himself as a misunderstood teen rather than the tormentor he truly was. Admiring glances from classmates bolstered his delusion of superiority, convincing him that he was untouchable in this social hierarchy. The few who dared to report him often found themselves too frightened to follow through after facing retaliation or witnessing Tyler's smooth manipulation of the situation. As the weeks rolled on, Tyler's bullying tactics evolved beyond verbal jibes. He frequently orchestrated incidents that left lasting scars on his victims. These ranged from public humiliation during lunch to subtle threats in passing periods. Each successful act of intimidation only solidified his standing in the school's social landscape. Students began to role-play scenarios where they would humorously narrate their unfortunate encounters with him, but the underlying tones of fear and anger were unmistakable. Despite the seemingly endless cycle of torment, whispers of defiance began to stir within the student body. A small group of brave souls had started discussing ways to confront Tyler's tyranny, talks filled with determination but laced with apprehension about triggering his wrath. They understood that change wouldn't come easy and that standing up to him might spark retaliation even before any real action could take place. Still, on this particular Thursday morning, as the laughter from Tyler's earlier taunt echoed through the halls, no one anticipated that today would be different. For Mrs. Thompson, a woman who had spent decades nurturing young minds, was not just another target. She was someone whose life experiences had forged an inner strength unseen by those around her. The dynamic between them hinged on more than just age or size. It was about to unveil layers of resilience and courage that would shake Tyler's foundation and reverberate through Sunnydale High forever. Little did Tyler know that his reign of unchecked aggression was about to collide with an unexpected force, one he never saw coming and certainly wasn't prepared for. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over Sunnydale High, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation and tension. Students were bustling about, exchanging jokes and gossip as they settled into their classrooms. However, within this seemingly vibrant environment lurked an undercurrent of anxiety, one that would soon erupt into an unexpected confrontation. Tyler Moore strolled through the corridors, a self-assured smirk plastered on his face. He had just finished a small display of dominance in the lunchroom, where he had mocked a younger student for spilling milk on his shirt. The laughter that followed fueled his confidence, and he felt invincible. With each taunt and sneer, he solidified his position as the school's undisputed bully. As Tyler passed by the library, he caught sight of Mrs. Agnes Thompson arranging books on a shelf. The sight of her small frame bent over the stacks triggered something in him. Perhaps it was the predictability of her presence or the opportunity to assert his control over someone who wouldn't fight back. In his mind, she was an easy target. After all, what could an elderly woman do to him? The thought made him chuckle. Feeling emboldened by the cheers of his peers who had witnessed his earlier triumphs, Tyler approached Mrs. Thompson with a swagger that exuded arrogance. "Hey there, Granny," he bellowed, ensuring his voice carried through the quiet library. The few students lingering nearby paused mid-conversation, curiosity piqued by what was about to unfold. Tyler believed this moment would only add to his reputation, as if targeting an old woman would elevate him further within the twisted hierarchy of high school social life. Mrs. Thompson straightened up at the sound of his voice, her gentle eyes narrowing slightly as she turned to face him. Unlike many others who would have flinched at Tyler's approach, she held her ground, radiating a calm that contrasted sharply with Tyler's brashness. Years spent working with children had taught her how to navigate confrontations with patience and understanding, but today felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air. "What do you want, Tyler?" she replied evenly, her voice steady but firm. The challenge in her tone took him aback for a brief moment. It wasn't what he expected from someone he deemed harmless. This unexpected resistance sparked something deeper within him, a flicker of irritation that quickly morphed into determination to reassert his dominance. "Just checking if you've lost your way to bingo night," he retorted with a mockingly cheerful laugh, hoping to elicit amusement from the small audience surrounding them. As laughter erupted from a few students nearby, Tyler felt invigorated once more. The validation from his peers seemed to fuel his arrogance further. But Mrs. Thompson's gaze remained unwavering as she regarded Tyler thoughtfully. "You know," she began slowly, "words can cut deeper than you realize." There was no intimidation in her tone. Rather, it was a wise observation that caught him off guard. For Tyler, this was just another game, a mere playground for testing boundaries. But unbeknownst to him, Mrs. Thompson was not just another victim waiting to be ridiculed. She held stories and experiences that had cultivated resilience over decades. Every word she spoke was laced with an unyielding strength that he could not foresee. As he prepared to launch another insult, Something deep within him shifted, a crack in the armor of bravado he wore so proudly began to reveal itself. Today would not be like any other day. This encounter would mark a pivotal moment neither of them could have anticipated. The air in the library hung heavy with tension as Mrs. Thompson faced Tyler, whose bravado seemed unshaken at first. The small gathering of students held their breath, snickering nervously at Tyler's antics, unaware that the stakes were about to rise dramatically. Tyler's arrogance had reached its pinnacle. He believed he could easily intimidate anyone in his path, including a seemingly frail elderly woman. With a calculated swagger, Tyler stepped closer to Mrs. Thompson, an unsettling grin stretching across his face. "What's wrong, Granny? Don't tell me you're actually standing up to me," he taunted, his voice booming as if he were putting on a performance for the audience of curious adolescents surrounding them. He relished in the attention, his inner circle chuckling along with him, fueling his insatiable need for validation through fear. Feeling overconfident, Tyler reached out and placed a hefty hand on Mrs. Thompson's shoulder, firmly enough to assert control but not quite strong enough to truly intimidate her. It was an act of hubris on his part. In that moment, he envisioned himself as an unstoppable force, a titan placing himself above all others. The laughter around him filled his ears as he leaned forward slightly, using his larger frame to loom over her in a display of power. Yet Mrs. Thompson didn't flinch or recoil. Instead, she met his challenging gaze head-on. The touch on her shoulder lingered for just a second longer than necessary, a calculated move by Tyler meant to provoke and humiliate her publicly. Around them, some students exchanged uneasy glances while others stifled laughter at the spectacle unfolding before them. "Tyler," she said calmly, her voice unwavering despite his aggressive demeanor. "Do you think cruelty makes you strong?" Her words hung heavily in the air like the quiet after a clap of thunder. They caught him off guard and radiated through the expectant crowd. In that fleeting moment, Tyler felt something shift within himself. An unfamiliar sensation of doubt crept into his mind. Here was a woman who was supposed to be meek and easy prey yet who stood firm against the storm he represented. Ignoring her question entirely and desperate to maintain control, he pressed harder against her shoulder as though increasing physical pressure might reinstate his fading confidence. "You should really know your place," he growled lowly but with false bravado, attempting to mask any signs of hesitation that flickered across his features. He leaned even closer, whispering words meant more to terrify than inform. "You're just an old lady. Nobody cares what you think." But this time there was little laughter from the crowd, only silence. His display had taken everything from mischievous amusement to something hauntingly uncomfortable. Misplaced shimmers of confidence transformed into cold sweat drenching the back of his neck as he absorbed Mrs. Thompson's unwavering presence backed by decades of untold strength. Without warning, the seconds feeling stretched thin like pulled taffy, something within Mrs. Thompson awakened as she firmly grasped his wrist and removed his hand from her shoulder with surprising ease and strength. In stark contrast to Tyler's expectations of power, she now commanded attention not by intimidation but through sheer grace and resolute spirit. Unbeknownst to them both, the singular moment would reverberate well beyond that library wall. It was merely the prelude to unforeseen consequences for Tyler Moore and an unveiling of resilience from Mrs. Agnes Thompson that neither had anticipated on that fateful Thursday morning at Sunnydale High. As Tyler's hand pressed firmly against Mrs. Thompson's shoulder, a wave of arrogance washed over him. He reveled in the laughter and attention from his peers, believing he had successfully cornered another victim. However, any sense of triumph was abruptly shattered when Mrs. Thompson's calm demeanor transformed into something altogether fierce. With surprising agility, she gripped his wrist, her fingers tightening like a vice that no one expected from someone of her stature. Tyler's eyes widened in disbelief as she swiftly removed his hand from her shoulder with an unexpected ferocity, as if an invisible force had snapped to life within her. The laughter around them evaporated, replaced by a thick silence that wrapped around the library like a shroud. Some students stared in shock. Others exchanged furtive glances, unsure of how to process this sudden shift in power dynamics. "Do not presume that you can intimidate me with your bluster, young man," Mrs. Thompson spoke firmly, her voice steady and resolute, cutting through the tension like a blade. For Tyler, who had always relied on fear and aggression to dominate those around him, this was an uncharted territory, a realm where his tactics had faltered before even starting. The atmosphere was electric. Students leaned in closer to witness what felt more like a dramatic showdown than an encounter between a bully and an elderly woman. Tyler had only ever seen submission in his victim's eyes. Their capitulation typically fed his ego. But here stood Mrs. Thompson, unyielding and fierce, a defiance radiating from her that ignited curiosity and admiration among onlookers. "Words can wound deeper than wounds," she continued, each word carefully delivered as if imbued with a wisdom shaped by years of life experiences and trials. "You may think you're powerful because you can throw your weight around." She gestured toward him with an openness that contrasted sharply to his closed-off bravado, but true strength comes from kindness and integrity. This was not the response Tyler anticipated. Rather than retreating or submitting to his aggression, Mrs. Thompson had flipped the script entirely. Her words pulled at something deep within him, an unfamiliar sensation not easily understood amid the prideful facade he maintained. Fueled by irritation and feeling his grip on the situation slipping away, Tyler attempted to regain control by barking back incoherent insults, hollow attempts to mask the uncertainty creeping in from every side. "You're just an old lady," he protested weakly, eyeing the ensemble of astonished faces watching closely for both entertainment and perhaps inspiration. Yet instead of retreating before his childish taunts, Mrs. Thompson simply smiled, a gentle smile that radiated warmth but carried with it an assertiveness that demanded recognition. "And you're merely playing a part as well," she replied softly but definitively. It was then that everything seemed to change within those four walls of the library. As students witnessed this confrontation unfold, moments measured not in milliseconds but rather in heartbeats, they realized they were witnessing something profoundly significant. A challenge to Tyler's cruel reign over fear itself and perhaps even a transformation occurring beneath their very eyes. The brief seconds that followed felt daunting as silence reigned over moments marked by uncertainty. Tyler's bravado began to waver under the weight of Mrs. Thompson's unwavering presence. Here was someone who had lived through storms he could never fathom, a woman who embodied strength quiet yet profound, and suddenly all the bluster he recruited became meaningless against such unyielding resolve. What began as an attack would transform into something neither anticipated, an awakening for both Tyler Moore and Mrs. Agnes Thompson that would ripple throughout Sunnydale High beyond this singular moment in time, potentially reshaping lives forged in resilience and bravery for years to come. As the tension in the library continued to simmer, a profound transformation was unfolding, not just for Tyler Moore but for Mrs. Agnes Thompson as well. While she had always been perceived as the gentle, unassuming volunteer, the confrontation revealed layers of her character that few had ever considered. Those who knew her merely as the old lady in the library were about to witness an awakening of strength and tenacity that had long been hidden beneath the surface. Years ago, Mrs. Thompson had not only been a dedicated educator but also a mentor to many students who needed guidance. She had spent decades teaching literature and history, shaping young minds with her rich insights and passionate storytelling. Her classroom was filled with discussions that ignited curiosity, and while many students once feared her strict grading, they later came to appreciate her unwavering commitment to their growth. Beyond her academic prowess, however, lay deeper roots of resilience. Mrs. Thompson had faced her own share of hardships throughout her life, a childhood marked by adversity and loss that shaped her into the compassionate yet formidable woman she had become. Raised during a time when women often faced significant societal constraints, she had fought against the odds to pursue her education, earning scholarships and accolades that few thought possible for someone from her background. Her youthful experiences instilled in her both empathy for those who struggled and a fierce determination to advocate for others, traits that would now come into play against Tyler's aggression. This background also illuminated why she volunteered at Sunnydale High. It was not merely an act of kindness but a conscious choice to give back to a community that had given so much to her. As she stood there facing Tyler, gripping his wrist with surprising strength, memories flooded back. Her days spent standing up for her students against unfair treatments from others, advocating for those who felt powerless. It was this part of her identity that now emerged as she faced down the very embodiment of bullying. "You think you can belittle me because I'm older," she continued steadily, "but age is not weakness, it is wisdom." Her words resonated through the hushed crowd, echoing back stories of resilience and courage that could inspire even the most timid souls in attendance. The students began to realize that Mrs. Thompson was far from defenseless. Within this unassuming woman lay a life rich with experiences that bred both compassion and strength. They could see how she embodied the very principles she taught, fostering kindness while standing firm against cruelty. Tyler's bravado wavered as he absorbed each word spoken by Mrs. Thompson. There was an undeniable shift in the air around them, a realization dawning not just on him but on everyone present. His attempts at intimidation were unraveling before their eyes like a poorly woven tapestry. The laughter he had thrived upon earlier faded into awkward silence. Admiration began to replace fear among his peers as they witnessed Mrs. Thompson reclaiming power over her narrative. This moment encapsulated more than just an encounter between a bully and his target. It symbolized the unearthing of hidden strengths within people who often went unnoticed. As Tyler stood there grappling with this new reality, he found himself on unfamiliar ground, confronted not just by an elderly woman but by someone who had weathered storms far greater than any petty adolescent scorn he could muster. Today was no longer just another day at Sunnydale High. It was a reckoning for everyone involved, especially for Tyler Moore, whose perception of strength and power would be forever altered by one woman's refusal to back down in the face of aggression. The encounter between Mrs. Agnes Thompson and Tyler Moore resonated far beyond that moment in the library, illuminating the widespread and often hidden consequences of bullying within the school environment. It was a stark reminder that bullying does not only affect the victims, it creates ripples that extend to bystanders and instigators alike. For victims like Tyler's previous targets, students who had faced his wrath, this moment was particularly significant. Many had borne silent witness to his reign of intimidation, feeling trapped in a cycle of fear that stifled their voices and diminished their self-worth. Each taunt, shove, or dismissive sneer left indelible marks, shaping their experiences in profound ways that went unnoticed by most. They had learned to navigate the halls of Sunnydale High with heads down, accepting the roles of misfits rather than embracing their individual strengths. However, onlookers present during this confrontation began to question their complicity in tolerating such behavior. Witnessing Mrs. Thompson's defiance sparked something within them, a recognition that remaining silent made them active participants in a culture of bullying. This awakening prompted an internal dialogue: what could I have done differently, or why didn't I speak up? The students who had once laughed along with Tyler started reevaluating their actions and choices. They felt an urge to foster an environment where cruelty would no longer thrive unchecked. In stark contrast, Tyler's actions reflected a more insidious aspect of bullying dynamics, the role of the instigator. As his bravado crumbled under Mrs. Thompson's unwavering strength, he stood on the precipice of realization. Perhaps this facade he constructed was not as impermeable as he believed. Bullying wasn't merely about exerting dominance over others. It was also indicative of deep-seated insecurities and unresolved issues lurking beneath the surface. Instead of reinforcing his own status among peers through intimidation, Tyler inadvertently began to sow seeds of doubt regarding his own identity and self-worth. The laughter he once relished morphed into an uncomfortable silence. This pivotal shift opened a door for him to confront the consequences of his actions, not just for others but for himself as well. As the school year progressed following this pivotal incident, students became more aware of the intricacies surrounding bullying and its aftermath. Conversations erupted around lunch tables discussing compassion, empathy, and standing up for one another, no longer just whispering in fear but openly challenging behaviors that sought to harm. The presence of both victims and witnesses fueled a new narrative at Sunnydale High, one where kindness prevailed over cruelty and courage overshadowed complacency. Moreover, teachers began recognizing signs among students who were ready to advocate for change, reshaping discussions around resilience and empathy within classrooms. Initiatives sprang forth aimed at combating bullying head-on. Workshops and assemblies emerged focusing on fostering dialogues about mental health, respect, and community bonds. Tyler found himself faced with an unexpected journey towards self-discovery. He could choose to remain mired in past behavior, or he could reflect on what truly constituted strength, the courage to change oneself rather than uphold a facade. With every step he took away from bullying came potential for healing, both for him and for those he had previously harmed. In essence, Mrs. Thompson's encounter with Tyler rippled outward throughout Sunnydale High. A powerful testament to resilience not only affecting one individual but encouraging an entire community to awaken from apathy into collective action against cruelty. In recognizing both sides of the bullying dynamic, the victim's pain and the perpetrator's fear, students at Sunnydale High began building bridges instead of walls, transforming their school into a haven grounded in understanding, empathy, and lasting change. In the days following the confrontation in the library, the atmosphere at Sunnydale High underwent a palpable transformation. The encounter between Mrs. Agnes Thompson and Tyler Moore had not only shaken the foundations of Tyler's perceived power but had also ignited a wave of introspection among his classmates. As word spread about what had transpired, students began to reflect on their own roles in the bullying culture that had reigned unchecked for so long. For many who had previously remained silent bystanders, there was an unmistakable sense of fear mixed with newfound respect for Mrs. Thompson. Once viewed merely as a harmless old volunteer, she was now seen as a fierce advocate standing up against tyranny. Students whispered about her strength and wisdom, and her ability to confront someone like Tyler was nothing short of inspiring. This shift in perception prompted some to reconsider how they viewed authority figures. Mrs. Thompson was no longer an invisible presence but a potent reminder that true authority comes from courage and conviction. Tyler himself was left grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Initially, he felt rage coursing through him, his image as an untouchable bully shattered before his peers. Yet beneath that fury lay a deep-seated sense of vulnerability and confusion. Having always relied on intimidation to assert his dominance, he found himself questioning his own identity and purpose within the school's social hierarchy. Instead of reinforcing his status through fear, he now faced the uncomfortable reality that he could be challenged, a lesson that stung harder than any taunt he had ever delivered. The silence that once accompanied his bullying began to echo louder as students chose to speak out against harassment rather than laugh or look away. The incident acted as a catalyst for dialogue around respect and empathy. Students who had previously stayed on the sidelines began sharing their experiences and standing up for one another. The ripple effects were undeniable. Conversations sparked during lunch breaks turned into organized discussions led by those inspired to take action against bullying. Teachers noticed this shift as well. They observed an increase in student engagement concerning anti-bullying initiatives. Workshops were introduced that focused not only on resilience but also on appreciating each other's differences, students working together to foster an inclusive environment where everyone felt heard and valued. These changes invigorated faculty members too, who felt motivated to support their students more actively in building a culture rooted in kindness. For Tyler, the repercussions were not limited to social upheaval. They seeped into his academic life as well. Once celebrated for his athletic prowess and charm, he began experiencing isolation from peers who once revered him. While some students still feared confrontation with him due to past experiences, others started voicing their disapproval of his behavior openly, a stark contrast from the silent acceptance he thrived upon before. As weeks passed, Tyler faced moments of reflection during which he considered changing his path, a notion that would have seemed ludicrous months earlier when he reveled in causing distress among others. He started attending counseling sessions offered by the school, realizing perhaps that addressing his issues could lead not only to personal growth but also toward making amends with those he had harmed. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson continued her work at Sunnydale High with renewed vigor. She became an integral part of discussions surrounding bullying prevention initiatives and empowerment programs for students seeking guidance on how to be allies rather than passive spectators in moments of cruelty. The lessons learned from this transformative encounter lingered throughout the halls of Sunnydale High long after its initial shock wore off, providing hope not only for victims like Tyler's previous targets but also reminding everyone involved that even small acts of courage can create monumental change within a community willing to embrace compassion over cruelty. In the wake of the confrontation between Mrs. Agnes Thompson and Tyler Moore, the broader community, teachers, parents, and school administration began to respond with a renewed sense of accountability and purpose. The incident had reverberated beyond the four walls of Sunnydale High, prompting discussions that extended into homes and neighborhoods, where parents sought to understand how their children were navigating the complexities of school life. Teachers at Sunnydale High quickly rallied together to address the growing concerns about bullying. They recognized that the incident could not simply be relegated to a momentary blip. Rather, it was an opportunity to foster meaningful change. Faculty meetings turned into brainstorming sessions focused on implementing comprehensive anti-bullying programs. They emphasized creating safe spaces for students to express their feelings and experiences related to bullying, ensuring that all voices were heard, especially those who had long felt silenced. The administration took immediate steps to revise their policies surrounding bullying incidents. They bolstered protocols for reporting harassment and created clear avenues for students to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. Workshops were organized for both students and staff, focusing on conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and effective communication skills. Teachers were encouraged to engage in open discussions with their classes about empathy and respect, reinforcing the idea that a culture of kindness is everyone's responsibility. Parents also played a crucial role in this communal response. Many began attending school board meetings to voice their support for initiatives aimed at combating bullying. They expressed a desire for collaboration between home and school, understanding that conversations about kindness should continue outside the classroom. Parent-led support groups emerged, encouraging families to share strategies for discussing bullying at home and reinforcing positive behaviors among their children. As the community came together, they organized assemblies where students could share their stories, both as victims and witnesses, to foster empathy and understanding among peers. These gatherings became platforms for healing. Students found solace in knowing they were not alone in their experiences. It was empowering for many to see their classmates stand up against bullying openly, breaking down long-held stigmas surrounding victimhood. The impact of Mrs. Thompson's brave stand also reached beyond Sunnydale High. Local news outlets picked up on the story, highlighting both her courage and the school's ongoing efforts to address bullying head-on. This newfound publicity prompted discussions within the larger community about how society can best protect its youth from the psychological scars of bullying, a conversation that resonated with many families who had faced similar issues. Tyler's journey did not go unnoticed either, as he began attending counseling sessions and engaging with educators regarding behavioral change. The community watched closely. Some students initially held resentment toward him for his past actions but gradually began recognizing his attempts at accountability as part of a larger narrative about growth and acceptance. This shift was emblematic of how community responses can influence individual behavior, as Tyler sought redemption through classes designed to teach empathy and inclusivity. He encountered peers who challenged him yet offered paths toward understanding rather than judgment. Through these various layers of accountability, from teachers promoting anti-bullying initiatives to parents engaging in open dialogues, Sunnydale High transformed into an environment where protection against bullying was paramount. The once pervasive atmosphere of fear gave way to one rooted in respect, making it clear that together, they could build a more supportive community dedicated to fostering resilience and nurturing empathetic connections among all students. Ultimately, this collective response underscored a powerful lesson. When individuals come together with resolve and commitment to change, they can dismantle harmful behaviors and replace them with compassion, paving the way for a brighter future for all involved. As the dust settled on the events that unfolded at Sunnydale High, the narratives of both Mrs. Agnes Thompson and Tyler Moore had taken profound turns, providing a rich tapestry of lessons about bravery, respect, and the importance of standing up against bullying. The confrontation not only reshaped their lives but also catalyzed a cultural transformation within the school community. Mrs. Thompson, once just a quiet volunteer in the library, emerged as a beacon of strength and wisdom. Her bravery in standing up to Tyler showcased that true courage doesn't always involve grand gestures. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to be a victim and asserting one's dignity in the face of intimidation. This act of defiance resonated with students who began to see her as an emblem of resilience. Mrs. Thompson's character arc illustrated that authority figures can inspire change not merely through their roles but by embodying values such as empathy and compassion. For Tyler, the path ahead was more complex. Confronted with his past behavior and its consequences, he faced an opportunity for redemption, a chance to redefine himself beyond the confines of bullying. His journey toward accountability was fraught with challenges, but it was illuminated by moments of introspection that encouraged him to recognize his own vulnerabilities. As other students observed his attempts to change, they learned valuable lessons about forgiveness and growth. Tyler's experience served as a reminder that even those who have erred can find paths toward improvement if they embrace humility and seek help. The ripple effects of this pivotal encounter extended throughout Sunnydale High, encouraging an awakening among students about the responsibilities they bore as bystanders. These lessons were further reinforced through classroom discussions and workshops where students were taught not only to empathize with victims but also to engage constructively with their peers. The dialogue surrounding bullying shifted from one of silence and complicity to one of active participation in creating a safer environment for everyone. Reflection became a central theme within the school culture. Students began sharing their experiences related to bullying, both as victims and witnesses, in assemblies designed to foster understanding and healing. This openness broke down barriers and allowed for conversations that had been long overdue. Those who once sat quietly on the sidelines now found their voices alongside their peers, empowered to advocate for kindness and assertiveness. Moreover, parents took notice of the changes reverberating through Sunnydale High and began participating actively in discussions around bullying prevention at home. They learned to reinforce messages of respect, empathy, and resilience among their children, recognizing that these conversations should extend beyond school grounds into everyday life. As this collective movement grew stronger, it became evident that standing up against bullying required not only courage but also commitment. From individuals taking personal responsibility to a community uniting with a shared purpose. The story of Mrs. Thompson's confrontation with Tyler was no longer an isolated incident. It became part of a larger narrative emphasizing accountability and support within the community. In conclusion, the events at Sunnydale High remind us all that every individual has the capacity for change and growth. Whether through acts of bravery like Mrs. Thompson's or through journeys toward redemption like Tyler's, the paths we choose can inspire others and lead to meaningful transformations within our communities. Reflecting on our own experiences with bullying, whether as victims, perpetrators, or bystanders, invites us to consider how we can contribute positively to fostering environments where kindness prevails over cruelty, turning our collective experiences into catalysts for lasting change. In doing so, we can pave the way for a future marked by compassion, resilience, and mutual respect among all individuals.